However, it was the only book within reach, and I hoped that it could give him some relief, as strange as it may seem, in the sheer absurdity of the tale I was about to read. He sat unmoving in the chair, and judging by his sudden calm, I wanted to believe that my plan was going to work. I had reached the familiar part of the story where Ethelred, the protagonist of the tryst, after failing to gain entrance into the maniacal hermit's home, decided to force his way in. At this point, the narrative continues something like this. Ethelred, naturally courageous and now emboldened by the potent wine he had consumed, decided not to engage in further pointless discussion with the hermit. Feeling the rain on his shoulders and fearing the approaching storm, he raised his spiked weapon and swiftly made a hole in the door's planks as he repeatedly struck them. Now, pulling with all his strength, he cracked and ripped and tore the massive door apart, causing the dry, hollow sound of the wood to echo deafeningly throughout the forest. As soon as I read this last sentence, I momentarily paused, listening. It seemed to me, although I quickly dismissed it as a product of my overactive imagination, that from some distant corner of the mansion there faintly echoed a sound. This sound had an uncanny resemblance to the very cracking and tearing noise described by Sir Lancelot. It must be a coincidence. Having read the line in my mind conjured the exact sound in real life. I brushed it off as surely as it had come from the rising storm outside. It had nothing to do with the story I was reading aloud. I chose to ignore it, and continued with my tale. But Ethelred, upon stepping through the door, was shocked to find that instead of encountering the hermit, he came face to face with a monstrous dragon. Its scales shimmered in the firelight, and its tongue flickered like flames. The dragon stood guarding a magnificent palace crafted from gold, its floor adorned with silver. On the palace wall hung a shield made of gleaming brass, inscribed with the following cryptic legend. Whosoever enters here as a conqueror shall find the shield, and whosoever vanquishes the dragon shall claim it as their own. Ethelred raised his weapon and struck the dragon on its head. The creature collapsed at his feet with a resounding thud, releasing its noxious breath with a shriek so ghastly and grating that Ethelred instinctively covered his ears, desperate to shield himself from the noise. Again, I stopped reading abruptly. There was no doubt. In this very moment, I unmistakably heard, though again I cannot tell from where, a peculiar and distant noise. It was a blend of a loud banging combined with a prolonged and grating shriek. Strangely enough, it mirrored the fantastical dragon's unnatural scream, as vividly as described by the storyteller. Overwhelmed by this second extraordinary coincidence, conflicting emotions clashed within me. I was not sure if I was curious or terrified. I refused to acknowledge these feelings outwardly in front of Usher. I managed to maintain my composure so as not to draw his attention to it, convinced that my imagination was indeed tricking me. Had I truly heard the sounds? Had Usher? I looked at him and saw that he had shifted his chair to sit squarely in front of the door. His face turned partially away from me. His lips trembled as he whispered what may have been a prayer or a curse under his breath. His head fell forward, but he was still conscious. I could see his eyes wide open, staring intently at nothing. His body had begun rocking back and forth in a rhythmic motion. Taking note of these observations, I quickly resumed the tale of Sir Lancelot. And now the champion, having killed the dragon, turned his thoughts to the shield and the spell that bound it. He cleared the dragon's lifeless form from his path and strode resolutely across the castle's silver floor toward the shield mounted on the wall. Remarkably, it fell to the ground at his feet, resounding with a powerful and ominous clang. At this I paused again. Hardly had the syllables escaped my lips when, as though a brass shield had indeed fallen heavily onto a silver floor, I heard a distinct and hollow metallic clang, a sound again clear and strangely muted, as if it came from far away. My nerves jumped, and I sprang to my feet, and moved quickly to his chair. Yet Usher sat unchanged, rocking rhythmically back and forth, staring at the door. I rested my hand on his shoulder and he jerked violently. A sickly smile flickered across his lips. A sheen of sweat covered his face. His eyes, although faced briefly toward mine, were unfocused, as if he were looking through me. He spoke in a low, frenzied murmur, as if my presence there confused him. Bending closer, I finally grasped the horrifying significance of his words. "Can you not hear it?" "Yes, you hear it. I have heard it. Many hours, many days. Oh, I have heard it. Yet I dared not speak the words aloud. But now we have put her in the tomb alive. I can say I heard her faint movements from within the coffin as we sealed it. Many days ago I heard them, yet I dared not say the words. And tonight, the story. Ethelred, the hermit's door being split open, the shriek of the dragon, and the shield's loud clang to the floor. But no, it was her coffin opening, the iron hinges grating in the crypt as she forced open the door, her screams as she fought to escape the room in which we had laid her. Where can I run? Will she be here any second to exact her revenge for my haste? Have you not heard her footsteps on the stairs? Do you not hear the heavy, horrible pounding of her heart? Madman! He jumped up suddenly, screaming the words as if losing his very soul. Madman! She has come! I tell you, she is just outside the door! I stood in horror at his words, unable to move as Usher seemed to manifest that very thing in that moment. The handle to the massive door began to turn. I heard the latch click as the door slowly swung inward. The radiant glow I had seen earlier flooded into the room as the door crept open on its hinges. It must be the wind. My mind yelled back at me, desperate to find an explanation. Lady Madeline was dead. She was resting peacefully in the vault beneath the house. It was only the storm. It was the strain of these last few days wearing on my mind. My hands rose to my mouth to stifle a surge of hideous laughter bubbling up within me. Usher stared unblinking as the door crept slowly open, and there stood the ghostly figure of Lady Madeline of the House of Usher. Her white robes were filthy and smeared with blood. Her hands appeared mangled, her nails broken as if she had clawed her way out of her coffin. Usher, shaking his head violently, whispered, "No, no, I cannot," over and over. For a brief moment she teetered in the doorway, trembling and swaying. And then, seeing her brother before her, she let out a long and horrible cry, fell headfirst through the open doorway, and landed heavily upon her brother. Sobbing, she hit at him, scratching him, and pulled him down to the floor. They both struggled with each other until he held her unmoving form in his arms. And with that, he too fell lifeless on the ground. He had indeed fallen victim to the terror he had foretold. Finally, I was able to break and run from that cursed scene. I fled, terrified, out the door and stumbled down the stairs, my heart pounding, my eyes wide, and my screams coming in short, uneven bursts as I ran out of the house and into the night. The storm raged on. The wind whipped through the trees as I ran past them. I stumbled almost blindly across the ancient path I had traveled some short weeks ago. But then, through the darkness, I beheld an otherworldly mist rising up from the lake, tendrils that swirled upwards around the house undisturbed by the raging storm. It climbed, engulfing the house. It tore at the walls, their ancient stones screaming in protest. The very timbers groaned, their fibers unraveling as the glow seared through them. The deafening roar, the ferocious surge of 1,000 raging waters made my eyes water and my ears burn. It blazed through the once barely noticeable crack, that zigzagging scar etched from roof to foundation. I stood there a trembling witness, as the very fabric of reality seemed to break open. My eyes strained to make sense of the scene I witnessed. As the fissure expanded, ripped apart by relentless force, A whipping wind swept through the crack, pushing it wider and wider still. I am sure I lost all sense of reason. I watched as the last remnants of the mansion vanished beneath the murky waters of the lake. Although I could hear the storm still raging behind me, all became still and silent as the grave before me, as if there existed a vacuum that severed me from the rest of the world. My comfortable and safe existence had become a distant memory, irrevocably altered. It was as if the very earth sought to bury the horrors that had unfolded within those cursed walls. Turning, I fled up the path, away from the site where the melancholy House of Usher once stood. The end. Hi, guys. Thank you for listening. Please stay tuned for more stories from the Blue Empress.